The fleet from the Thraxian Confederation hung in the void like a swarm of angry metallic wasps. Their ships were biological and mechanical hybrids, grown from living metal and piloted by a hive-mind consciousness that valued perfect logical efficiency above all else. For 300 of their years, they had conquered, assimilated, or erased every spacefaring civilization they had encountered. Their strategy was a perfect, unbreakable equation. Assess the enemy's logic, find the flaw, and exploit it with devastating, surgical precision. Emotion, creativity, and what they called biological randomness were variables that could be calculated and accounted for. Nothing was truly illogical. It was simply a pattern they had not yet decoded. Admiral Ilara Vance stared at the main view screen of the UNSC Vindication. The Thraxian fleet, on a dark cloud against the distant glow of a blue star, was beautiful in its terrifying efficiency. It moved as one organism, a single thought given form. Her own fleet, the assembled remnants of Earth's interstellar navy, looked like a collection of mismatched toys by comparison. Ships of different classes, different eras, all jury-rigged and patched, floated in a defensive formation around the agricultural colony of New Eden. It was a planet of no real strategic value, only 3 million civilians and fields of genetically modified wheat. They formed the standard encroachment pattern Sigma. Her first officer, a calm and collected man named Commander Sato, reported from the tactical station. According to the tactical logs, from the fall of Cygnus Prime, yet we have approximately 4 hours until they finalize their calculations and launch a coordinated assault that exploits a weakness in our formation. Vance nodded, her eyes not leaving the screen. She was a woman forged in the crucible of early, disastrous contact with other less logical but still dangerous alien species. She understood the Thraxians better than most. She had studied every battle, every transmission, every scrap of data. She knew their strength was also their greatest vulnerability. "They're running the numbers now," she murmured. "Analyzing our fleet composition, our energy signatures, our projected tactical responses based on every known human military doctrine. They're looking for the logical flaw. And they'll find one, Admiral," Sato said, his voice tinged with a familiar grim acceptance. "They always do. And our formation is a mess. The power distribution is uneven. The Einstein's port shields are at 92% efficiency. It's a classic point of failure." Vance finally turned from the screen, a strange, small smile playing on her lips. "Exactly, Commander. It's a classic point of failure. It's the most logical point of attack." Sato frowned. "Admiral, I don't understand. Should we be reinforcing it? Rerouting power?" "No," she said, her voice calm and clear. "We're going to give them what they want. We're going to give them a perfect logical choice, and then we're going to rely on the one thing their perfect logical minds cannot process." She stood up, walking towards the holographic tactical display that shimmered in the center of the bridge. With a few deft movements, she began issuing orders, not to strengthen the line, but to seemingly weaken it further. She ordered the Einstein to feign a reactor fluctuation, a classic sign of impending failure. She instructed 2 cruisers to move slightly out of formation, creating a tempting gap. She had supply drones jettisoned, creating a field of drifting debris that looked like panicked, wasteful jettisoning of resources. "Admiral, these orders, they violate every tactical protocol in the book," Sato said, his eyes wide as he watched the fleet respond to her commands. "We're deliberately creating the very weaknesses they're looking for." "We are," Vance confirmed. "We are giving them a perfectly logical, perfectly predictable scenario. Their hive mind will analyze it. They will see the weak point. They will calculate the highest probability of success, and they will act. Their entire history, their entire culture is built on this. They cannot conceive of a species that would willingly create a disadvantage for itself. To them, it is illogical. And because it is illogical, they will have no data, no precedent, no equation to explain it. They will see the trap we've laid, but they will be unable to believe it's a trap, because no logical being would set a trap that looks exactly like a weakness. On board the Thraxian command vessel, a being of pure, focused intellect, known as the Unity Kine, processed the incoming data. The human fleet was a chaotic mess. The readings were clear. The Einstein-class vessel was showing signs of imminent power grid failure. The defensive perimeter had a gap wide enough to slip a corvette through. The humans were, by all logical accounts, panicking. They were making mistakes. Now, the optimal attack vector was clear. A concentrated strike through the gap, using the failing ship as a shield against return fire, then a swift engagement to disable the command vessel. The probability of success was calculated at 99.87%. And yet, the Unity. Kane hesitated. The data was too perfect. It was the textbook definition of a vulnerable formation. But the humans had been fighting for hours, and they had not made a single tactical error. Now, suddenly, they were making many. It was a contradiction. Its logic processors churned, seeking a variable, a hidden factor, a previous example of such behavior. There was none. In all the database of assimilated species, none had ever acted with such deliberate self-sabotaging illogic. The hesitation was a microsecond. But in that moment, the Thraxian fleet, a single consciousness, I was not 100% certain. The flaw was in their own logic. A 99.87% probability was not 100%. And in that 0.13% of doubt, the perfect, unified front of their fleet wavered, just slightly. Ships that should have moved in perfect synchronicity were delayed by a nanosecond as the hive mind re-ran the calculations, searching for the ghost in the machine. That was all the time Admiral Elara Vance needed. On the Vindication, Sato saw it first. "Admiral, the Thraxian fleet, their formation is losing coherence. They're hesitating." Vance's smile widened. "They're thinking about it. They're trying to find the logic in our illogic. Now, Commander, execute Order Cobalt." From the seemingly random field of debris, from the blind spots created by the feigned panic, a new threat emerged. They weren't warships. They were small, a one-person craft, barely more than a cockpit with an engine and a weapons package. They were the fighters and bombers humanity had used in its own ancient atmospheric wars. They were too small, too fast, and too unpredictable for the Thraxians' grand strategic calculations. They didn't fit into the equation of capital ship warfare. While the Thraxian hive mind was still trying to understand why a fleet would deliberately show its throat, these angry, human-piloted wasps streaked through the gap they had created. They didn't follow a logical flight path. They swerved, they dodged, they reacted on pure human instinct and adrenaline. A Thraxian defense turret, programmed to anticipate the predictable arc of a missile or the steady approach of a fighter, he was useless against a pilot who pulled a maneuver that would tear a less robust ship apart, simply because it felt like the right thing to do. The first wave of bombers, their payloads armed, aimed not for the Thraxian command ship, but for the point where the hesitation had been greatest. They targeted the connective tissue of the fleet, the ships that were now a fraction of a second out of sync with the whole. Their missiles struck home. The explosions weren't devastating to the heavily armored biological ships, but they were disruptive. They created chaos in the physical fleet, which translated directly into chaos in the hive mind. The perfect, singular thought shattered into a billion conflicting pieces of sensory data. The logical equation had collapsed. The Thraxian fleet, for the first time in its history, was not thinking as one. It was a collection of individuals, suddenly isolated, suddenly afraid, and against a terrified, confused enemy, the chaotic, illogical, and fiercely creative humans pressed their advantage. The battle for New Eden had begun, and it was being fought on a field the Thraxians had never even known existed, the field of illogical human strategy. The first wave of human starfighters, what the pilots grimly called the bug swarm, did more than just disrupt the Thraxian formation. They shattered the hive mind's unity. For a terrifying few minutes, the Thraxian fleet was not a single calculating entity, but a collection of terrified individual organisms, each ship's biological pilot component screaming in psychic agony from the sudden violent severance of the collective. They were like a body whose nerves had been cut, each cell suddenly aware of its own fragile, isolated existence. Admiral Vance didn't let up. She knew this was the only chance. If the Thraxians re-established their link, they would adapt. Their logic would eventually process the human tactic as a new variable. They would learn that humans used small, unpredictable craft. They would calculate for it. The window of confusion was small, and she intended to drive a truck through it. All ships, full forward acceleration. Target the outliers, the ships that are drifting. Don't give them a moment to reform, she commanded, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm of alarms and reports on the bridge of the Vindication. The main human battle line, which moments ago had looked like a panicked, broken formation, surged forward with terrifying purpose. The feigned weakness became a spearhead. The Einstein, its reactor fluctuation suddenly and miraculously gone, led the charge, its main cannons blazing into the flank of a Thraxian dreadnought that was spinning helplessly, its crew lost in a sea of individual panic. The battle devolved into a brutal, close-quarters melee. It was the kind of fight the Thraxians abhorred. There was no elegant strategy, no logical progression. It was chaos, fire, and steel. Human ships, designed with redundant systems and a healthy respect for catastrophic failure, traded blows with Thraxian vessels that were exquisitely optimized for a perfect fight, not a desperate brawl. A lucky shot from a human frigate aimed on a gut feeling by a gunner whose grandmother had taught her to trust her instincts. It pierced a seemingly random seam in a Thraxian cruiser's living metal armor. The ship convulsed and died, its biological components letting out a psychic shriek that further panicked its comrades. On the bridge, Sato was a whirlwind of information. "The Theseus is reporting heavy damage, Admiral. They've lost main power, but their captain is asking if they should initiate a collision course. He says, and I quote, 'It feels like the right thing to do.'" Vance almost laughed. "Tell him to stand down. We're not winning by throwing our ships away. We're winning by being harder to kill and harder to predict. Get a tug on its way. Let's use that dead ship as a mobile shield." The Thraxian Unity Keen was in agony. Its perfect thoughts were a jumble of pain, confusion, and a terrifying new concept it had no word for: fear. The humans were not following any known pattern. They exploited the chaos its own fleet was in, pressing the attack not on the strongest points, but on the most confused. They used their damaged ships as cover. They flew their fighters through the debris of destroyed vessels, using the wreckage as camouflage. They targeted ships that were already isolated, not for strategic gain, but simply to increase the overall chaos. It was illogical. It was terrifying. It attempted to reform the link, to send out a pulse of calming, unifying thought. But the human starfighters, those tiny, maddening gnats, were still buzzing through the fleet. Their pilots, riding pure adrenaline and stubbornness, were unpredictable variables that the Unity kind's wounded mind could not calculate. Every time it tried to focus, a new explosion from a different, unexpected angle would shatter its concentration. Then Vance gave the order that truly broke them. Broadcast on all Thraxian frequencies. Use the universal mathematical primer we have. Send this message. Your logic is flawed. Your analysis of us is incomplete. We are not a problem to be solved. We are a question you cannot ask. The message was simple, almost poetic. It was also profoundly illogical. It was a statement, not a question. It offered no data, no terms for surrender, no logical proposition. It was pure, emotional, human defiance. The Thraxian hive mind tried to parse it. It tried to find the hidden meaning, the logical argument within the words. It found none. It was an absurdity. And in the current state of psychic agony and confusion, the absurdity was like a virus. It couldn't be processed, and so it was simply accepted as a terrifying truth. They were fighting something they could not understand. Their one weapon, perfect logic, was useless. One by one, the Thraxian ships began to break. They didn't surrender, for that was a concept as foreign as the human message. They simply, fled. They disengaged from the melee, their damaged drives pushing them away from the chaotic, illogical nightmare. They sought the quiet, empty void where things made sense. The Unity Cain, its mind a shattered wreck, could only watch as its beautiful, perfect fleet dissolved into a rout. Sato stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The red icons representing Thraxian vessels were blinking out or moving away at maximum speed. They're retreating, Admiral. The Thraxian Confederation is in full retreat. The bridge of the Vindication erupted in a cheer so loud it was almost deafening. Vance let them have their moment, a small smile on her face. But her eyes were still on the view screen, watching the last of the enemy ships disappear into the black. She knew this wasn't the end. The Thraxians would be back. They would analyze this battle for years, trying to find the logic in it, trying to build an equation that could account for human unpredictability. But for now, for this moment, the illogical humans had won. They had won not by being stronger, but by being something the enemy could not compute. They had won by being gloriously, defiantly, and irrevocably human. The silence in the void around New Eden was a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the empty, dead silence of space, but the relieved, an exhausted silence after a storm. Rescue ships, their hulls scarred and patched, picked through the debris field, searching for escape pods. Engineers in heavy suits worked on the Theseus, coaxing its dead reactor back to life. On the planet below, the 3 million civilians of New Eden emerged from their shelters, blinking in the light of their blue sun, not quite believing they were still alive. Aboard the Vindication, the initial euphoria had settled into a grim, contemplative calm. The cost had been high. A dozen ships were gone, their crews lost. Hundreds of starfighter pilots hadn't made it back to their carriers. Victory, Vance mused, always had a bitter taste. She sat in her quarters, a small Spartan room with only a bunk, a desk, and a single prized possession, a framed physical photograph of her grandparents' farm on Earth. It was a picture of golden wheat fields under a wide blue sky, a stark contrast to the black and gray of her current reality. A soft chime announced a visitor. "Enter." Commander Sato stepped in, looking exhausted but relieved. He held a data tablet. "The first reports are in, Admiral. Damage assessment, casualty lists, and—" He paused, a strange look on his face. "The first long-range sensor readings from the pursuit drones we launched." Vance gestured for him to continue. She didn't turn from the photograph. "The Thraxian fleet is in complete disarray. They're not regrouping. They're not forming a defensive perimeter. They're just flying in all different directions. Our drones tracked the command ship. It's moving away from Confederation space, not towards it. It's heading out towards the galactic rim, into the unknown. Finally, Advance turned. She took the tablet from Sato's hand and scanned the data. It was true. The Unity Cane, the ultimate expression of Thraxian logic, was fleeing into the unexplored void. It was the most illogical action it could possibly take. It was running from a threat it couldn't understand, heading into a place where the variables were completely unknown. It was an act of pure, unreasoning fear. "The data from the battle is going to spread," Vance said quietly, handing the tablet back. "Not just through their confederation, but through the other species they've conquered, the ones they've incorporated into their hive mind. For the first time, those subsumed species will have felt the Thraxian fear. They will have felt their master's panic. That seed of doubt, that knowledge that the Thraxians can be beaten, is more valuable than any victory in a single battle." She looked back at the photograph of the farm. "My grandmother used to tell me that the best way to win a fight with a bully wasn't to be stronger than him. It was to do something he didn't expect. Make him look foolish. Make him doubt himself. A bully's power is all in his head. Once you get in there and mess with it, he's not a bully anymore. He's just a scared kid." Sato nodded slowly. He looked at the tactical display on his own wrist unit, a ghost of the chaos that had been. "So that's the strategy? Illogical chaos being unpredictable?" Vance shook her head. "No, Commander, that's the tactic. The strategy is much simpler and much harder. The strategy is to be human, to value the thing that makes us illogical. Our stubbornness, our creativity, our love for a patch of dirt with a farm on it. The Thraxians tried to defeat us by making us fit into their equation. But we don't fit. We never did. We're the variable that can't be calculated. We're the mistake in their perfect code." She stood up and walked towards the door of her quarters, pausing at the threshold. "Get some rest, Commander. We have a lot of work to do. We have to rebuild. We have to figure out how to help the species the Thraxians left behind. And we have to get ready. The next time they come, and they will come, they'll have tried to account for us. They'll have built new equations, new logic, and we'll have to find a new way to be gloriously, illogically human all over again. That's our only constant. That's our only weapon. And so far, it's undefeated." She left Sato standing in the quiet of her quarters, Ada looking at the photograph of the sunlit field. He understood then. The wheat in that picture wasn't just food. It was a symbol. It was a reminder that humanity came from the dirt, from the chaos of nature, from a place that didn't follow neat logical rules. They carried that chaos with them in their hearts and in their minds. And against a universe of cold, hard logic, it was the most powerful force of all. The Thraxian Confederation had tried to solve the problem of humanity. They had failed, not because the solution was too hard, but because humanity wasn't a problem to be solved. They were a story to be lived, a song to be sung, a question that had no answer, and that, in the end, was their greatest strength.